Hello Internet, in this video we're going to be building a gaming board for the universe of Warhammer 40,000. So this past week I've been lucky enough to team up with a fellow YouTuber by the name of Groundeffected Studios. You may know him for videos such as a drivable rhino, a flame-throwing tank, I can't remember the name of it, maybe a Land Raider, a drivable squig buggy, and a flying hover tank. On his channel he paints both miniatures and large-scale statues of superheroes and other characters, which are incredible. He has a hobby shop in Littlehampton in West Sussex, which will allow you to buy lots of paints and basing supplies, 3D printed items, and some Warhammer models as well. And recently he decided he wanted to up the game a little bit and start hosting some gaming nights. Now he already had some boards that he'd made a while ago that he was a little bit unhappy with. He had only built these for display purposes, and we thought it'd be cool to tear one apart and rebuild it with the purpose of having it be a playable board. When doing a bit of research it became clear that the board that had already been made was actually the exact size of your standard kill team board. So as it was the perfect size, we decided we were going to make this into a fully fledged playable kill team board. One of the first things we decided is that we wanted to have a single piece of terrain that would be fixed to the board at all times. The main reason for this is it would simply be more immersive. You can have the board look like a more finished product, whilst having the rest of the building still be able to move about and have the games change each time. Now, if we were just going to have it sat on the surface, then it wouldn't need fixing to the board at all. It would kind of be pointless. So, to keep things interesting, we decided we were going to cut out part of the hill that had already been made and shove a building into that hole. So the first part of this process was all about tearing up the board. We needed to make a hole for the building to fit into, and we also wanted to level out one end of the hill to make it more playable, but also keeping a bit of variation in height. Once a hole for the building had been made, we decided to make a piece of flooring to go in the footprint of the building. To do this, we took a bit of foam board, tore at the edges, and scored some tiles into the surface. After tearing a bunch of holes in the board, I decided it was a little bit too flat on one end, so I tore up some cork, stuck it down, and made sure to tear some holes in the middle and stuff, just to make it look a bit more natural. I interrupt this video just to say thank you to the new patrons I received last week, and that is Gillian Kemp and Michelangelo Kurz. If you want to join my Patreon, it is £2 a month, and you get behind the scenes access to everything I'm doing, whether that be miniature painting related or illustration, and it's a good place to just hang out and chat. Yeah, thank you to those who have already joined. There's a link in the description down below if you wish to look into it, and let's just go back to the video. Once we were both happy with the general shape of the board, it was time to add a load of sand and stones for ground texture. To do this, I had to absolutely smother the board in pavar glue, and that was a lengthy task. One thing I found particularly interesting is there was quite a bit of static grass on this board from before, and instead of taking it off, we decided we were just going to paint over the top of it. So when I was applying the pavar, it became quite matted and really horrible to work with. But the sand and stones still stuck to the surface pretty well. Once I was happy with the ground covering, I took the board outside on a little podium stand thingy to dry in the sun. And whilst it was there, I sprayed it with a bottle that was mixed up of water and pavar glue to harden the surface. Using a couple extra layers of this kind of mixture will really help seal the board and prevent any of the sand and stones falling off the surface. Shortly after that, I was terribly impatient because the sun had already hidden and decided I was going to use a hairdryer to try and dry the board. The board is far too big and a hairdryer was a stupid decision, and it did not work. Being set in the realms of Warhammer 40,000, it would be impossible to create a board without any skulls. So with that in mind, I applied 4 skulls to the board. I just stuck these on using super glue, and I kept it to 4 so that we weren't overdoing it, because I had to come back and paint these later, and we didn't really want it to be too distracting anyway. One corner of the board we had decided was going to be a dried up riverbed, and to further push this idea, I decided I was going to put down some patches of crackle paint, because when the bottom of a riverbed is overexposed to moisture, when it suddenly dries up, the earth moves apart from each other and cracks and crumbles a little bit. So I thought that that was a good way of displaying that on the board. Once the whole thing had got to a point where it was sufficiently dry to start working on, we superglued in place some broken walls and general bits of rubble around where the main building was embedded in the slope. Now, a small step like this, adding those little extra details, can really make the board come to life. Rather than just having your normal L-shaped ribbons across the board, these extra bits of rubble make it seem more alive and immersive. On the morning of day 2, I decided I was going to help out a little bit more with the terrain and paint the metallic areas on some of the buildings. The day before,
your dad
had spent all day airbrushing these pieces of terrain with a lovely vibrant red colour, and then using a wash to give variations in tone, but not washing the whole piece, but instead being selective as to direct your eye to where to go. If you want to see more about how the terrain was done and how the incredible board frame was built, make sure to check out Groundeffected's YouTube channel, because he is also doing a video on this project, which is unsurprising, and he will cover the bits that he did in a lot more detail. There'll obviously be a link to his video in the description below, and make sure to check it out. In this time, the board had also been sprayed by
your dad
using 3 different spray paints: a dark brown, a mid-tone brown, and a highlight. Rather than coating the whole thing in a single colour, this instantly allowed some volume. You can keep the lowest areas of the board darkest and the highest bits lightest. It instantly suggests to your brain that this is a 3D living space, where the highest areas are exposed to the most light and the lowest areas are in shadow. One of the next steps for me was to paint the skulls that I had glued onto the board the day before. To do this, I painted it all with a brush, and I used my normal bone painting colour scheme technique, and there will be a link to the video in which I explain this in the description below or in the card up here. Once I was done with the skulls, I dry brushed the board with a bone colour followed by ice yellow, and I did this on the areas that had large grey stones, just to bring out the textures of those, because they were at the moment just a flat grey. After the dry brushing, the two of us tag teamed in placing some grass tufts all across the board. Now, we did this sparingly and tried to place them where they make sense, places where moisture would gather, so that is the low dips in the board, and where there are any large piles of rubble where water would get stuck in amongst it, in areas like that. Once we were happy with the grass tuft placement, there wasn't much left to do, but one of the things that we did do was use an airbrush to apply some washes, and we used a couple different tones in order to keep it interesting. We used a brownish red and some sepia tones. The last thing to do was simply to dry brush some of the areas on the board and finish up the terrain pieces. And with that, we were done. I would just like to say a huge thank you to Groundeffected Studios for inviting me to come and take part in this video. It was a great project to be a part of. I really enjoyed it, and it has annoyingly made me want to do my own board, which I know now is a lot of work, but it has an amazing result and I really want to give it a go. If you've watched this part of the video, I would just like to say a huge thank you. It means a lot. Maybe consider giving this video a thumbs up or even subscribing to the channel so that you get my most recent videos appearing in your subscription feed. And as always, I'll see you later.